In a previous video, you've seen me make a rod holder that mounts vertically in your boat and holds your rod straight up and down. But if you don't like your rod sticking up like a flagpole and you'd like to have your rod holder at an angle, I've come up with a solution. I used some 1¼ PVC and an 1¼ T-fitting, and I created this. This is a rod holder that mounts on the cleat on your boat and holds your rod at an angle. Why don't you come along and see how we put this together. I'm also going to cut a few extra parts because of my next video. I'm going to create a rod holder that'll hold your rod at an angle, and it doesn't use a cleat at all. Well, the first thing we're going to do is cut ourselves a couple of rod holders. So we're going to make those 12 inches long. You'll recall I like the Japanese saw for cutting pipe because this wide blade cuts real straight. Next thing we need to do is mark on our rod holder 3 inches down from the end. And since this isn't going to be a vertical rod holder, I'm not going to worry about the mounting hole on the other end. So 3 inches down, we'll mark these up. We're going to use our drill. And I've got two sizes of drill bits here. First one's a little smaller. We'll start with the small hole. It's always useful when you're drilling to put a small hole in first, instead of trying to do it all at once. And one of the things we've learned with PVC is when you drill, it's so soft that once your bit grabs, it wants to pull the bit down through and you can damage the underside of your piece of pipe. So I'm going to grab a piece of wood. It's really aggressive when it goes through that PVC. Okay, we made our hole. That's about a ½ inch hole on the end of our pipe. Now what we want to do is take our pencil and a straight edge, and we're just going to mark parallel lines down here beside this hole extending to the end of the pipe. What this is going to do is the channel we're going to cut to allow our fishing rod to slide down in there if it's a spinner type rod. Before we cut those out though, we want to splay open the end of our pipe so that it receives the handle easier. And to do that, I'm going to use this metal funnel and heat gun. Okay, I've got my metal funnel fastened to my work table, and I've made a mark on the side here to show where I want my pipe to end up once it gets warm, and that'll splay it open. And what you want to do is just take your heat gun and apply a little heat. It only takes about a minute with this thin wall 1¼ It takes a little longer if it's heavier. And we're just going to warm that up, and then we'll push it down over there and get that up. And once you push it down over there, you want to hold it after you turn off your gun and let it cool in position. If you pull it off right away, the PVC wants to kind of return to its previous form. So make sure you hold it and let it cool down after you take the heat off it. I'll heat the inside as well. Now we're just going to hold it there while it cools. We don't want to push too hard or it'll make a pucker in it. We don't want that. Another thing to keep in mind is don't cut this out until you've splayed the end, because otherwise when you push down on it, it'll open up too much and you won't be able to hold it together. So we're just going to hold that down there for just a little bit longer. Make sure it takes that set. Some people plunge this into cool water, but I found that if you just wait a moment or two and let it cool, you'll be good to go. You can always reheat it and do it again if it changes form and you don't like what you've got. So there we have it. It has a nice beveled end on it, and that'll be nice for when you try to put your fishing rod into the holder. You're probably all wondering about the band-aid on my thumb. Well, I'm pretty good around power tools in the shop, but don't put me in the kitchen slicing tomatoes. That's all I've got to say about that. We've got our ends beveled out now, so all we need to do is cut out the slot in the end of our rod holder. Okay, now we just take a little sandpaper and we're going to clean up all these edges where we've sawed this out. Right up here where the rod goes into the slot, you can actually take your scissors if you want and nip those sharp corners off. If they're a little hard to nip off, you can always go back to your hot air gun and warm them up a little bit, but heavy duty set of scissors or even metal shears will nip that right off. Then just take the sandpaper and round them up just a little bit. Actually, that's looking pretty good. And like I said, you can drill a couple holes in there and you'll have the version that mounts upright in your boat, but that's not what we're going for today. So we want to modify this T-fitting so that we can hold our rod holder at an angle instead of straight up and down. So that's going to be the next step. I think in order to work on this, before we mount the cleat in our boat, I'm going to mount it to our work table, and that way that'll give you a place to test our efforts here. I've got my cleat mounted to my work table so I can use it as my guide while I'm building my rod holder. And then when we've got our rod holder built to our satisfaction, then we can move the cleat over to the boat and we'll have a place to use our rod holder. My intention is to use this 1¼ T and the rod holder that we've made and make that mount here at an angle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the slot on my rod holder down. That way if I put a spinning rod in there, at the end here the reel can stick down. Bait casters, most of them have a pretty long handle, so they don't usually go into the rod. The reel itself doesn't usually go into the rod holder anyway. My idea is the 1¼ fitting is going to be cut so that it fits over the cleat, but not so far that it tilts too far with the rod in it. So we're going to have to figure out that angle and then mark where we want to make our cuts on the T fitting. I'm using my speed square to position the angle of my rod holder, and then I'm going to put a mark across the front here. It gives me an idea of where level is when the T fitting is in position. To determine the next cuts on my T fitting, I know that I want to push it in from the side with the rod holder vertical. So I'm going to mark here where the top of the cleat is, and here in the middle I'm going to mark where the bottom of the cleat is on the rod. Now I'm going to move the rod to the angle that I want to arrive in, and I'm going to mark again the bottom of the cleat under here. I've positioned my rod holder here, and I know that right here I need to make a cut across. As you can see on the sides of the cleat, there's closed areas where the cleat fastens down, so we can't have that area. We need to cut those out. Then if I rotate my holder and use my speed square to give me the approximate angle that I need, I can figure out where the bottom of my cut needs to be so that it holds fast on my cleat when it's at an angle. So to start, I'm going to cut out these two areas, and to do that I'm going to use my Dremel multi-tool. It's got a fine-toothed little cutter on the end, and I can cut down in those rectangles without cutting any other part of my T-fitting. I've cut out my T-fitting so that it fits onto the cleat now. All I need to determine is how far to cut these slots down into the T-fitting so that it sits at the appropriate angle. And I want to kind of sneak up on that. I don't want to get too aggressive and then go too far. To get my angle on my T-fitting, I know straight up and down takes us clear down to here. And if I leave a little room for the cleat, I'm pretty certain I'm going to need to cut at least down to there with my slots. I've got my slots marked. Let's make those cuts. Okay, we'll give those a go. We've got our slots cut out now in our T-fitting, and they fit onto our cleat just like we had envisioned. And when it's on there like that, it sits at the appropriate angle that we were going for. All we need to do now is clean up our cuts, give this a paint job, and mount it on our boat. Today I've used this 1¼ inch pipe and 1¼ inch T-fitting, and I've made a rod holder that'll work on the cleat in my boat. And I've constructed it in such a way that it kind of locks onto that cleat. Now it'll hold your rod at an angle, and the rod's not sticking straight up in your boat and getting in the way. If you get a bite, it's going to hold on to your rod, and this isn't coming off because actually the pressure on the fitting helps hold it. If you want to add a little extra safety and make sure your rod holder stays on the cleat, you can add one of these miniature bungee cords that you can pick up at Dollar Tree or Harbor Freight or whatever. If you like my videos, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. If you'd like to see some more of my videos, just click right there. We'll see you next time.